I was first introduced to the Percy Jackson series at the age of 10, picking up a copy of The Lightning Thief from my Scholastic book fair and reading it on a family road trip. It was in many ways my first leap into a more structured narrative, one that broke away from the cookie-cutter elements of many children's tales, and one that managed to utterly ensnare me. For the first time, opting out of TV or video games to just sit down and read. It was always one of my favorites. But as I grew up, life got busy. I stopped reading altogether, and this once great series faded into obscurity. A few months ago, I found my passion again and brought it to YouTube, at which point I got the recommendation. So I did the only logical thing and dove headfirst into my childhood, my mind swimming with the tales of Greek heroes and gods I had all but forgotten, while being hit with the intense feelings weaved into this 5-novel classic. So join me as I discuss a narrative that, even as an adult, managed to hook me, all to ensure that it never fades again. Percy Jackson is a young boy who never felt he was good at anything. If he wasn't failing classes or getting kicked out of school, he was supporting his struggling mother and avoiding an abusive stepfather. Yet through learning of his ancestry and navigating the problems that come with it, we're given a relatable yet foundational tale of self-discovery, one that lays the groundwork for the themes of the series while introducing readers to millennia-old deities in an easily digestible format, all through the eyes of a struggling boy who learns he's the son of the sea god. Virtually every half-blood suffers from both ADHD and dyslexia, something the author, Rick Riordan, chose to include due to personal experiences with his children, and in many ways is the most strikingly modern aspect of the narrative, not only due to their inclusion, but how well they are written. I cannot speak personally for dyslexia as I have never been diagnosed, yet as someone with ADHD, I was surprised by the accuracy of its portrayal, not leaning on surface level understandings of distractibility, but focusing on the little things, such as the effects of caffeine or struggling to not speak out of turn, naturally weaving these conditions into the narrative due to the character status as demigods, with minds wired for ancient Greek and lightning fast reflexes. One of the first characters we meet in this journey, Grover, serves as an early look into the mindsets and experiences of many mentors Percy will later encounter. One of the satyr's main jobs is to locate young demigods, protect them as long as they can, and eventually lead them to safety at Camp Half-Blood, a job with a historically low success rate. Grover enters into the narrative already carrying the intense burden of those he failed, primarily Talia, and it's a sentiment shared by the character of Chiron, with Percy often wondering how many half-bloods he witnessed leave camp grounds to never return. Death is in many ways a normal part of life for demigods. Percy's told not to worry about his place in the central prophecy because he might not even make it to 16, whilst one of our main characters has some of the highest seniority in camp at age 12. Grover is a glimpse into half-blood life, but Annabeth is a product of it, running away from home at age 7 and spending several months on the run with fellow demigods. She had personal experiences with death at an incredibly early age, and spent most of her childhood desperately trying to comprehend the world around her. Being a daughter of Athena, she is incredibly intelligent, yet still suffers from the same conditions as Percy, and must face the conundrum of trying to understand the actions of gods, something that for non-immortals can be seemingly indecipherable. She is craving to escape camp, and even more so to prove herself. So when a child of the sea god is given a dangerous new task, she's all in. The quest to find the Master Bolt is the central conflict around which this entry revolves, yet it also plants doubts and insecurities in the mind of our main character. Percy is the son of Poseidon, yet in many ways feels like an afterthought, only recognized to prevent war and be used as a tool. He scoops portions of his food into the flames at every meal, though questioning if anyone's ever listening. while looking at the sunken and sad faces of unclaimed children, some of whom will never know their parentage. He asks himself a central question of this entire series. If gods exist, why don't they intervene to make things right? Why do they have children that won't reach adulthood and squabble amongst themselves, whilst putting entire civilizations at risk? All of this existing in the background of a relatable story about discovering yourself, sandwiched between lines of witty dialogue and blooming friendships. The plot never takes itself too seriously, ensuring that these deeper and darker aspects don't become overwhelming, while still leaving room for emotional moments to shine. A central motivation for Percy's embarking on the quest is the possibility of rescuing the only parental figure he ever had. He asks himself why, in a world where magic and gods are real, he can't have his mother back, disregarding the countless mythological tales warning against this very temptation. Something Grover is rather quick to point out, in spite of the fact he's doing the exact same thing, undertaking the quest to gain his searcher's license, all to look for a god that the myths say is dead. Regardless of this, Grover believes Pan can still be found, and that he will be the one to do it, telling Percy he has to believe. It's through these examples that a central theme of the series first appears: hope. Hope in spite of the circumstances presented, and hope in spite of what others may tell you. It's this which carries Percy to the finale of the novel, where eventually he succeeds, though first requiring a refusal to sacrifice the quest and, ironically enough, acceptance of his limitations. He returns the Master Bolt to Zeus and recovers the Helm of Darkness from Ares, not only preventing a war, but facilitating the return of his mother in the process. Though amongst all his triumph, he can't help but feel mildly scorned, with Poseidon referring to his existence as a wrongdoing and a feeling that his worth is only measured by his usefulness. He's, in a way, glad that his father's distant, as any attempt at affection or reconciliation would have felt hollow after 12 years of abandonment. It's abundantly clear that relationships between demigods and their parents can be shallow at best, non-existent at worst, and often entirely transactional. The series Riordan is crafting is as much about damaged family dynamics as it is about engaging mythological adventures, an important aspect through which the primary villain can be understood. Luke Castellan, a son of Hermes, spent a large portion of his early life on the run, protecting fellow demigods whilst constantly fighting for survival. I previously mentioned how Annabeth's 4 months alone had crafted her character. Luke spent years, the entire time growing more and more desperate, while his father refused to intervene, reaching camp just to watch his cabin fill with the faces of unclaimed children, forgotten by their parents, only to be called upon when needed, all whilst haunted by the death of his closest friend, easily preventable if the gods had done more than watch. The building blocks of resentment are clear, and after a failed quest, he wanted to pull Olympus down, stone by stone, at which point it wasn't difficult for Kronos to assert influence. The Lightning Thief is a phenomenal introduction to the world Riordan is crafting, laying the groundwork for the core themes of the series and hooking the reader with interpersonal relationships that only deepen as the series continues. It's fundamentally a story of self-discovery, crafting a relatable narrative whilst refusing to shy away from more complex issues. The novel stands as one of my favorites in the series, and in its conclusion, we're left with a newly confident Percy Jackson, the birth of new friendships, strained family dynamics, and a successful launch to the story of our childhoods. With the Lightning Thief establishing many of the core relationships on which the series is built, the Sea of Monsters takes the opportunity to expand them, granting further insight into our characters whilst posing new questions and reframing core conflicts. The novel opens displaying the failed escape and capture of Grover, who in his relentless hunt to find Pan, stumbled into the same trap laid for his predecessors. It's these circumstances which act as Percy's primary motivation throughout the narrative, while creating a scenario in which self-determination is necessary. He's desperate to rescue his friend, but with Chiron's removal as activities director, Percy's left with an apathetic Dionysus and openly cruel Tantalus, forcing him to take matters into his own hands and rather quickly acquiring assistance from extended family. Up until this point, the gods had always been presented as distant, neglectful, and often entirely uninterested. An environment that crafted characters such as Luke and something Percy personally resonates with. Yet the introduction of Hermes challenges that very idea, displaying that he deeply cares for Luke and is even worried about him, asking Percy to help because you can't give up on your family, no matter how tempting they make it. His concern shows that the gods aren't a monolith, and recontextualizes the conflict from a scorned rebellion to an irrevocable rift between a parent and their child, displaying to Percy the value of family and causing him to reconsider his stance on members of his own. Though family can be a double-edged sword, something represented quite well in the character of Clarice, a daughter of Ares who's given the quest over Percy to rescue Grover and recover the Golden Fleece. In The Lightning Thief, she's presented as a bully, rival, and at times, minor villain, something which in the beginning of this novel appears to continue. However, through her desperation to return successful and her constant fear of failure, we're shown a different side of the character, seen not an angry bully, but a nervous teenage girl, desperately trying to keep up with her father's expectations, with some of her actions likely existing as overcompensation, trying to stand out to a god who clearly favors his sons over his daughters. However, much more is gained from the circumstances presented than a deeper understanding and recontextualization of characters, but also an expansion of relationships and introduction of new ones. Given the very purpose of the quest being to rescue Grover, Percy and Annabeth are given substantial more alone time, creating scenarios where they are forced to rely on another and further deepening their relationship. We see through the Siren's Call just how vulnerable Annabeth still is to Luke's influence, hearkening on the question he posed to Percy some chapters back. Is the inherently flawed system of the gods still worth fighting for? A question which, given their lineage, has a clear undertone. Is family still worth fighting for, even when they scorn you, embarrass you, or betray you? This is where Tyson comes in, a Cyclops born of Poseidon and a nature spirit about a year prior to Percy, though aging significantly slower. Abandoned as a child, he grew up homeless on the streets of Manhattan, before being accepted into Merryweather Prep and unknowingly befriended by our main character. He's by all definitions a monster, of the same yoke as the one who captured Grover and the one partly responsible for Talia's death. He technically shouldn't even be allowed in camp, and is often a source of embarrassment, with Percy spending early parts of the novel feeling shame towards his brother and resentment towards his father, in spite of the fact he prayed for help moments before the claiming. All coming to a head when Tyson admits, "I am a monster, but I will be a good monster." With the transformation of his perception through continual proving of his worth, the character comes to embody the very essence of the family dynamics woven into this narrative, showing Percy the exact value in what Hermes told him, and reminding us that family is not what you expect, but it's what you're given. So you shouldn't give up on them, no matter how tempting they make it. In the end, they are successful in their task, rescuing Grover and letting Clarice return the fleece to gain favor with Ares. Annabeth and Percy have grown significantly closer, and Tyson reveals that during all those years alone, he asked his father for help. Having his prayers answered, when a brother was sent his way. The Sea of Monsters is in many ways exactly what a sequel should be, expanding on existing ideas while pushing the plot forward in a meaningful fashion, all whilst never leaving the phenomenal dialogue and childlike characteristics that made the original great. The reveal of Talia returning to life was done incredibly. In the letter from Poseidon saying nothing but "brace yourself" was both perfectly ominous and wonderfully intriguing. It's a novel that, above all else, is about family, leaving us with the central question of what comes next, something which the sequel answers in a spectacular manner. The Titan's Curse is in many ways a direct answer to the Sea of Monsters, flipping the previous entry's focus of relationships on its head, instead providing commentary on how they can be used to manipulate, divide, and ultimately conquer us. We open with the attempted rescue of Nico and Bianca D'Angelo, during which we are formally introduced to the character of Talia. A daughter of Zeus, she's impulsive, quick to anger, and at times far too arrogant. In many ways, just like Percy, which is exactly why they don't get along. As Annabeth said, they would have been best friends or strangled each other. Talia throughout this narrative serves a key purpose in putting a mirror up to our main character, inadvertently showing Percy his strengths, his flaws, and preparing him for the battles to come. For the majority of it, however, the two are at each other's throats, something only worsened when the rescue attempt goes south. Annabeth disappears and Artemis intervenes. Talia outright blames Percy for their situation, describing how his actions may have gotten Annabeth killed and reminding him how serious things can get, while Bianca's decision to join their new guests shakes him to his core. Artemis's hunters are immortal, taking an oath at a young age and never returning to normal life. At first, things don't seem to change, but as the years go by, they grow distant, disconnected, and almost mono-emotional. As the more you see, the less it affects you. It's this experience which comes to inform Percy's decision in the finale of the series, and can be used to explain some of the actions of immortals throughout the narrative, not understanding the severity of situations, often due to a lack of personal stakes. The entry revolves around Atlas's escape from Mount Othras, a conflict which, as previously stated, contains intense control and division through the use of loved ones, something our main characters are particularly vulnerable towards. An important aspect of Atlas's curse is that the sky can only be forced upon a Titan, meaning that if anyone else were to take his burden, it must be done so willingly. In the Sea of Monsters, we saw how much Annabeth still cared for Luke, and here we see that vulnerability in action, as she's manipulated into taking the sky off his shoulders, falsely believing he'd returned. A plan conceived so Artemis, a goddess who deeply cares for young women, would willingly take the burden on herself. However, something I want to focus in on is the fact that Luke was willing to take the sky to begin with, displaying his unique hatred for Olympus. As Poseidon would later say, he's an interesting case, something which would only be expanded upon in later entries. The central quest, like many things in this novel, is a mirror of the Sea of Monsters, with Percy and Grover now being the ones to rescue Annabeth, deepening their friendship in the process. Though joined by Bianca D'Angelo, the huntress Phoebe, Talia Grace, and the party's leader, Zoe Nightshade. Originally residing in the Garden of Hesperides, Zoe joined the hunters thousands of years ago after a tragic interaction with Hercules, during which she'd helped him steal an apple from the garden and given him the sword Anaklusmos, earning her a banishment only to be abandoned and written out of the annals of history. Given this information, it should come as no surprise that she holds a particular disdain for male demigods, especially Percy, since he bears the very sword that cost her family. However, through Percy's continual self-sacrifice and willingness to put others first, he proves his worth to Zoe, in her final moments, telling him he's nothing like the demigod he'd once admired, and she's incredibly honored that he now carries that blade. Something that's quite bittersweet, considering those that were lost in the very process. Bianca D'Angelo enters the narrative appearing quite selfish in numerous ways, primarily because of her choice to join the Hunters and abandon her 10-year-old brother to a life of solitude. However, we later learn through her conversations with Percy that this was as much a decision of desperation as of selfishness. Desperation to escape the intense pressure of acting as a mother figure at 12 and gain a single semblance of security, ultimately being redeemed through her sacrifice in the junkyard. One only necessary due to an attempt at collecting a gift for Nico, a seemingly small, unimportant figurine that she was willing to risk her life for, showing how deeply she cared for her brother all along. However, the tragic situation and Percy's response highlights another of the core themes woven into the series. Every quest operates on a prophecy, a set of actions that must occur given by the Oracle at Camp Half-Blood, constantly raising the question of fate and if it's ever possible to change it. After Bianca's sacrifice, Percy asks himself why it's ever occurred, if there was anything that could have stopped it, and why it wasn't him. A similar question is posed when Talia chooses to join the Hunters, cutting herself off from the main prophecy and never reaching 16. Did she actually change her fate, or was it always meant to turn out that way? It's a question we frankly never get answered, likely because there simply isn't one. However, I would personally give more credence to the idea of self-determination, something Riordan seems to agree with, as it appears to be a big theme in the following entry. However, before getting to that, we must discuss the finale of this novel, and arguably the most iconic scene in the series that comes with it. Our heroes reach the summits of Mount Othris with the intention to rescue their friends, however are quickly overwhelmed by the combined strength of Atlas and his troops. Knowing they need the power of a god, Percy offers to free Artemis and takes the weight of the sky on his shoulders. His vision goes blurry as he describes the feeling of all his muscles turning to fire and wanting to scream, but not having the strength to do so. It was one of the few scenes I vividly remembered over a decade later, and even now it makes an incredible read. In the end, they're successful once more, with Artemis pushing Atlas into Percy and forcing the sky on his back. Though evil has been curbed, it's for reasons I already mentioned, a bittersweet victory. Something characterized by the dance Percy shares with Annabeth on Mount Olympus. Sad, but hopeful. The Titan's Curse puts on full display just how consistent of a writer Riordan is, highlighting a series' strong suit of interpersonal relationships by incorporating it into the villain's grand plan, all whilst further expanding the world and slowly but steadily moving in a more mature direction. Scenes such as Dionysus calling Percy by his real name were fun ways to show progression in our main character, while the reveal of Nico and Bianca being children of Hades was done phenomenally. Having him be the only figurine Nico didn't have, and creating intense symbolism for the lives of half-blood children, were the very touching and acknowledgement of Bianca's father, even through a mere idol, brought danger to her life. It's in the following that her death is further explored. A grand plan is finally hatched, and relationships come to fruition. The Battle for the Labyrinth acts as the penultimate novel for this phenomenal series, and doesn't hold back in any aspect, continuing the trend of bringing millennia-old narratives to life, delivering on long-awaited payoffs, and taking notes from contemporaries by raising the stakes in an incredible manner. The opening scene of Percy's disastrous attempt at attending high school orientation is one that perfectly encapsulates Half-Blood life, not because of any fantastical elements, but what's lost in their appearance. Percy and Annabeth were planning to have an uneventful summer, one where they could relax and enjoy each other's company as underlying feelings began to brew. Yet the attack by Empusai tear that dream to shreds, forcing them to call off their afternoon while a character is introduced that drives a wedge between them. Rachel Elizabeth Dare is a mortal girl with an ability to see through the mist and witness reality in its true form. an ability shared by many parents of demigod children, such as Percy's mother and Annabeth's father. Though first introduced in the Titan's Curse, it's here where she begins to put increasing stress on our character's relationship, causing jealousy to appear in Annabeth in a similar manner as Luke does to Percy, rather ironically pushing their relationship forward by creating distance between them, replicating the relatable human experience of only realizing the value in someone when you stand to lose them, an ever common motif in this novel as loss is ever present. Percy witnesses the overwhelming pain Clarice experiences upon seeing the state of Chris Rodriguez, mind utterly broken after Luke sent him on an expedition to explore the Labyrinth. He's a living embodiment of what happens to demigods who turn themselves over to the cause of Kronos. Yet Clarice stands in lasting defiance, determined to nurse him back to health and restore the young man she once knew. A hopeful stance on loss, in direct contrast to a character who must learn to accept it. Nico D'Angelo is a young boy who lost his sister at the age of 10. Yet through this novel, he comes to understand the finality of death better than some adults. In the beginning, he is angry, blaming Percy for allowing his sister to sacrifice herself even after he promised to protect her. He desperately tries to utilize his powers to bring her back, despite all the pain and heartache it would bring her. As a son of Hades, he knows it won't work, but he doesn't care. He selfishly tries all he can, falling easily into manipulation by King Minos in the process. It's only with the guiding mentorship of Percy does the spirit of Bianca answer his calls, coming forth from the underworld to deliver a final message of acceptance and inform her brother that, though she loves him, he can't change the past. A concept further exemplified in one of the greatest characters in the entire series. Daedalus was an inventor and architect born thousands of years ago. Hired by King Minos of Crete, he designed the labyrinth himself, and ignoring the warnings of Apollo, gave it a malevolent consciousness, creating a maze which would torment innumerable demigods, mortals, and the gods themselves for thousands of years, products of which we already witnessed in the aftermath of Chris Rodriguez, only to have himself and his son imprisoned after helping Theseus and Princess Ariadne defeat the Minotaur, which it housed. During their escape attempt, his son Icarus would fly too close to the sun, melting the wax on his feathers and falling to his death in perhaps the most famous Greek tale in human history. His invention inadvertently caused the death of his own son, creating a state of grief and loathing that drove him to kill his own nephew, a young boy, for the crime of having ingenuity that rivaled the inventor himself. All told to us through the dreams of Percy Jackson, bringing a narrative to life that has lived in the collective human consciousness since the founding of Western civilization. Daedalus is haunted by what his creations have become and what they've driven him to do. Yet knowing King Minos, whom he had killed, would decide his fate in the underworld, he ran. He ran from his past and ran from death for thousands and thousands of years, endlessly pouring his mind into new bodies and making a deal with Kronos to get his son and nephew back. He is the embodiment of how ambition can destroy you, and how you can never truly run from your fate, as no matter how many bodies he makes, the brand of a murderer placed by his mother Athena always reappears. Yet it's through this narrative that Daedalus comes to finally accept death, helping defend Camp Half-Blood in a time of need and sacrificing himself to ensure that the labyrinth he created can never harm another soul again. However, before we reach that, we must first witness the death of a god. For 3 books, Grover had been desperately searching for Pan, nearly killed, getting captured, and facing exile when none on the council believed he felt the gods' presence. In a last-ditch attempt at succeeding in the task he'd dedicated his life to, he joins Percy to explore the labyrinth and look once more. What he discovers is not a grand visage, but the last moments of a god. The reality is, Pan did truly die thousands of years ago, or at least he wanted to. But the satyr's endless hope kept him alive and never let him rest. All this time, they had been searching for someone who can stop the wild's endless destruction, never accounting for the fact that they themselves could have done it all along. And that's exactly what Grover's told. Pan's message is one of self-determination, taking fate into your hands and defending what you hold dear when no one else can help you. Grover releases Pan's spirit, allowing him to move on and gaining a portion of his powers in the process. But more importantly, a mission is laid before him. Rally the nature spirits to defend their homes and spread the word that Pan is truly dead. Pan's death acts as a reminder of free will and lays forth a call to action of taking hold of the circumstances you're given and molding them into a better life. An ever-present theme in this novel, as we're given countless examples of characters who fell victim to their circumstances and ones who rose above it. Briar's is a 100-handed one, last of the Hekantakades to walk this planet and one of the most powerful elder beings still alive. Yet he's locked in a prison of which he could easily escape, only remaining because of an utterly broken will. It's only when Tyson reminds him of the potential he has and a call to action by Daedalus does he take control of his own destiny once more, in direct contrast to the character of Ethan, a son of Nemesis who fell victim to the throes of radicalization due to his scorned upbringing. Even after being given a chance to escape, he refuses, opting to upend the entire system rather than fight to change it, telling Percy, "I'm the child of Nemesis, goddess of revenge, and this is what I was made to do." Though no character is a better example of this phenomena and the calamity of it than Luke. We already know at least partly why he followed the path he did. However, it's in the finale of this novel that the severity of his decision is unveiled, as Kronos comes to inhabit him, taking control of his body and forcing him to watch as family members are slaughtered, destroying not only the life he had, but any positive memory associated, as friends watch the young man they once knew become nothing but a glove for the Titan Lord. The novel ends with an attack on Camp Half-Blood, one in which Percy witnesses children he grew up with lose their lives defending, for many of them, the only home they ever had. It's a first glimpse of the war to come, and Percy sees just how much it may cost him, though like the Titan's curse, we're left with a message of hope as well, as Chris's madness is cured and Poseidon makes a visit for Percy's birthday, warning him of the dangers to come, yet reassuring him in the process, with the final lines containing the beginning of a plan posed by Nico D'Angelo on just how Percy may stand against the Titan Lord. The Battle for the Labyrinth is a story of self-determination, how our circumstances affect us, and how the little things can bring some together or drive them apart. It gives us a fresh take on classical mythology and brings their themes to life in a modern and meaningful manner, while containing some of the best characters in the entire series, ones whom I could make entire videos breaking down their development. The novel stands by far as one of the best in the entire series, only following the climactic conclusion the finale brings. The Last Olympian begins with a single line. "The end of the world started when a Pegasus landed on the hood of my car." And from there, it doesn't stop, as the entry is filled cover to cover with the foundational elements that make this narrative tick, diving deeper than ever before into our characters and wrapping up grand storylines in a meaningful and impactful manner. The opening scene displaying the excellently planned and near perfectly executed mission to destroy the Princess Andromeda shows a satisfying progression in our characters, long earned by the story told, as Percy easily maneuvers through the cruise ship that terrified him in earlier novels, disarming half-bloods and defeating monsters in a seamless manner. Though the former, while done flawlessly, displays a core weakness he still carries, while reminding the audience of our character's innocence. He disarms a half-blood but doesn't kill them, feeling pity and warning them to flee the ship as soon as possible. An action that, though noble, likely cost his friend's life, as Percy was ID'd and the crew alerted, confirming the attack of which they already knew was now in action. Beckendorf, a son of Hephaestus who was adored by his peers and an ever-present friend of Percy Jackson, is forced to sacrifice his life to ensure the mission's success, remaining on board while the ship blows and haunting our protagonist for the remainder of the novel, inevitably driving him to make a decision from which he could never return. It's revealed that in order to prepare his body for Kronos, Luke had taken on the curse of Achilles, making himself invulnerable but for a single point on his body. In the process to learn how he'd done such a thing, we dive into the character's backstory, visit his mother's house, and discover just how haunting of an upbringing he was subjected to. Luke's mother is May Castellan, a mortal woman who shortly after having him attempted to take on the role of Oracle, not knowing that Hades had cursed the process after the death of Nico's mother. Her mind was utterly broken by the attempt, and Luke was abandoned to grow up with a mother who was incapable of raising him, hiding in a closet during psychotic breaks while praying to a father who never answered him. Percy actually empathizes with Luke, understanding now more than ever why he became the man he did, while questioning in all those years why Hermes never visited. In my coverage on the battle for the Labyrinth, I referenced an individual's ability to make a choice to rise above their circumstances and craft a better life for themselves. Yet diving into Luke's upbringing calls to question if he ever truly had that option, something only further explored in the finale. Though before coming to that, we must witness perhaps my favorite scene in the entire series. After receiving a blessing from his mother and escaping the dungeons of Hades, Percy decides he has no other options. He follows in the steps of demigods before him and bathes in the river Styx. He was warned by the spirit of Achilles to ground himself, focus on a single point of weakness, and remember what keeps him going. He describes it as worse than bathing in boiling acid while seeing visions of countless loved ones he would risk his life for. But as he feels himself fade, it's not his mother, Grover, or Rachel who pulls him out. It's Annabeth. I described in my Harry Potter video how, amongst all else, above political commentary and grand thematic elements, interpersonal relationships were the lifeblood of the narrative. And that rings true here as well. What makes this scene so phenomenal is not what it contains, but what it follows. Pages upon pages of careful development coming down to this singular moment where Percy realizes what matters most. A realization that informs his final decision and puts on full display the beating heart of the series, inevitably bringing us to the climactic conclusion built over 5 novels in 5 years. The Battle of Manhattan, a tale of a seemingly unstoppable force bearing down on an undermanned and ill-equipped group, valiantly fighting till all is lost. The setup of Prometheus putting the entire city to sleep while Kronos freezes time was an ingenious way to build a grand set piece, while simultaneously allowing us to end where it all began, in the streets of New York. It's a near unwinnable fight, as the gods are busy fighting Typhon with only 40 half-bloods left to defend Olympus. Yet it's not without hope. During a truce, Percy's given Pandora's box, and those familiar with the myth will know just how impactful this is, as amongst all the death, sickness, and famine released to the world upon its opening, hope yet remained. Though it's here, Prometheus gives our protagonist a choice. At any time or any place, when fighting grows hard and spirits run thin, all Percy needs to do is open the jar and let hope finally fade. but he never does. Percy's learned from the mistakes of other demigods and, most importantly, understands his own weaknesses. He opts to have the jar hidden away and eventually hands it over to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. Earlier in the novel, Percy encountered her outside the Castellan household, an interaction during which she uttered perhaps the most memorable set of lines in the entire novel. I am here because when all else fails, when all the other mighty gods have gone off to war, I am all that's left. Home. Hearth. I am the last Olympian. You must remember me when you face your final decision. And here he does. He gives the jar to Hestia for the same reason the finale is named after her. Because when all else fails, hope is what remains. Calling back to the initial theme I brought up in the very first novel in this series. Hope. Hope in spite of the circumstances presented, and hope in spite of what others may tell you. And much like the lightning thief, it's hope that in the end perseveres. In his final moments, after years of suffering and countless half-bloods slaughtered, Luke wrestles control back from Kronos and uses a knife on his only vulnerable point, stopping the return of the Titan and ending his own life in the process. He asks Annabeth if she ever loved him, and she answers truthfully. There was a time I thought, you were like a brother to me, Luke, but I didn't love you. Annabeth cared for Luke from the moment he rescued her as a child, and she believed in him until the very end. But what she experienced wasn't love. It was a hyper-idealization born from desperately clinging to the first person who ever made her feel safe. She knows what love feels like because she has that connection, one so strong that she'd be willing to take a knife for the only reason of knowing he'd do the same. And it's this connection that, above all else, dictates Percy's decision to turn down immortality, not wishing to end up a deity when so much life remains, but more importantly, opts to use his wish for better treatment of half-bloods, asking that all minor gods have cabins and no children are abandoned, hoping to prevent another Luke from ever occurring again. Made even more devastating when Percy talks with Hermes. I've previously referenced how in the Sea of Monsters, the entire relationship between Luke and his father was recontextualized. Yet here, it's flipped on its head for a third time, as we learn that Hermes knew of Luke's fate the entire time, forced to watch as his son was led like a lamb to the slaughter, hopeless to intervene, though desperate to form a connection. I asked the question if Luke was ever truly given the opportunity to rise above his circumstances. And here we get our answer. Although he died a hero, the story of Luke is finalized as one thing and one thing only: a tragedy, a monument to the gods' sins, and a wake-up call that things must change. Yet Hermes tells Percy that before long, the Olympians will forget their promise, pointing out that his very birth was the breaking of an oath, calling forth the need to never stop fighting, a theme which is ever present in countless fantasy novels, and I plan to further explore in the future. Yet evil is vanquished for now, and a positive change has occurred. For once, Percy's given the opportunity for a normal life, no matter how brief, and it's described that as he ran down Half-Blood Hill, racing Annabeth to the road, for once, he didn't look back. The Percy Jackson series is one of the most incredible I've ever read. Its gripping story and relatable characters managed to hook me as a child, and are enjoyable as an adult as well. Its finale is one that calls back to the very conception of the narrative, and puts on full display just how phenomenal of a writer Riordan is. There are mountains and mountains of things I left out of this video for the sake of time, so I hope this is only the beginning of a long series of videos covering this series. I am excited to finally see these novels getting an adaptation that does them justice, and more excited to dive into the sequels, many of which I have never read. Please share your first experiences with these novels in the comments down below, and be sure to make recommendations on what I should cover next. Until next time, thank you for watching.